Senator Johnson moves motion 106, seconded by Senator Royce. Senator Johnson, you want to be heard on the motion?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
During the pandemic, Wisconsin lost roughly 25,000 regulated childcare slots. 25,000 childcare slots. As of October 2022, 32% of operators were considering closing. 69% were experiencing a staffing shortage, and 52% have a longer waiting list as a result of these shortages. As of March 2023, there were an estimated 17,000 childcare provider jobs going unfilled in Wisconsin. This is a 12% increase from the same time last year. And when you consider 54% of individuals in the state live in a childcare desert. Now, the shortage of childcare providers is due to a number of factors, including low wages, high turnover, and lack of qualified workers. When we talk about low wages, the average childcare worker makes on average $12.36 per hour. On average, for an experienced worker, the top 2/3 wage earners that are experienced make on average $13.68. And that's with an associate's degree in early childhood education. Now, considering you can go to Quick Trip and work their third shift and make $19 an hour, or you can make $15 an hour starting at Walmart, and you don't need an associate's degree in early childhood education, we can see why a lot of those positions are going unfilled. Now, during the pandemic, the Governor Evers, with ARPA dollars, created something called Childcare Counts. Childcare Counts saved roughly about 60% of our childcare industry by helping them to backfill a lot of those vacant positions by including extra dollars. The Childcare Counts program provided financial stability needed for over 3,300 providers to help them stay open, recruit and retain over 22,000 qualified staff, and help to provide continuing high-quality care for 113,000 children statewide. 1 in 4 children in Wisconsin participated. 1 in 4 daycare centers indicated in the national surveys that they were able to keep their doors open because of this program. When we talk about childcare affordability and we talk about quality care, there is a huge difference. Quality care costs, and it costs significantly. I was a childcare provider before I came to this body. I closed my daycare center in September 2012. And for a couple of weeks, I needed to find something to do until I got sworn in January. Not only did I own my own child care center, which was 24 hours, 7 days a week, I also had a side hustle. I taught child care continuing education hours to child care professionals, and I went into daycare centers and I helped problematic daycare centers turn their daycare centers around. These were child care centers that were on the verge of having their daycare centers closed by the state of Wisconsin. I was asked to go by a daycare center to come in and help them because their daycare center was on the verge of closing. And this was a rather large daycare center on the north side of Milwaukee. I went into this daycare center and I really didn't understand how big the problem was until I walked into this center that had over 100 children, and all of these children were on Wisconsin shares. And this was an extremely poor daycare center. I met with the state of Wisconsin, DCF, and this was DCF under the Walker administration. They weren't that friendly. They had basically came to shut this daycare center down. We made a deal. They told me that if I could turn this daycare center around, they would allow me to keep the daycare center open. As long as the daycare continued to show progress, they would not shut it down. I had from October until January to turn a failing daycare center, and I mean it was failing, into a thriving daycare center. When I first took this job, I didn't know how I was going to do it. This daycare center was absolutely awful. And I went in, and the first thing that I had to do was start disenrolling kids. And that was extremely hard for me. But when a daycare center is losing money, the first thing that you have to do, I had to have the courage to do for this daycare center what I couldn't do for mine. And that was to let some of those kids go. Larger, more successful, quality daycare centers, if parents can't afford to pay, they disenroll them. They kick them out. So I had to go into this daycare center and I had to kick kids out. The second thing that I had to do after I kicked out these kids, I had to fire teachers. I had to let teachers go because we didn't have the kids. I had to let them go. I had to retrain the entire staff. I had to come in and cut out some of the bonuses or the extras that the daycare centers were providing, which were free diapers and wipes, because a lot of these low-income parents could not afford to provide diapers and wipes. I had to go up on the cost of care, and I had to make the parents pay their copays. And when the parents couldn't afford to pay their copays, I had to kick them out. Long story short, I did it. And by the time I left in January, that daycare stayed open for an additional 5 years. DCF told me that they were prepared to close the daycare center down. They didn't know how I did it. They didn't expect me to be successful. And to be honest, hell, I didn't either. But I'm telling this story to say that if you have children, you know the importance of not only having childcare, but having quality childcare. And quality childcare costs. If you are near the top of the income guidelines, closer to the 200 level, and you are on the verge of losing your benefits, the lower the subsidies are. When I closed my daycare center, I had a family, and they were closer to the 200 level. I made $2.33 per hour per child, and it was a family of 2. And the mom couldn't afford to pay the copays. And I kept those children when I should have kicked them out. When I closed my daycare center, that mom lost her job because nobody else would accept her children. While I was at the daycare center that was absolutely horrible, one of my daycare parents came to enroll her kids. I met her at the door and told her that she couldn't bring her kids there. And she was like, "Miss Tanya, I have to." I was like, "This daycare center isn't ready." And she was like, "I'm gonna lose my job." I said, "I will try to be here as much as I can, but I can't guarantee that your kids will be okay here. This daycare center is not ready." Luckily, I don't know where those babies went, but she didn't bring them back to that daycare center. If we want our kids to have quality care, we have to invest. We sat here and listened to the cost of housing a child in Lincoln Hills, which was $1,246 a day. Over $450,000 for one child. $340 million is not a lot of money to save an entire child care system.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, and thank you, Senator Johnson, for those powerful stories. I think it's important to recognize the impact, obviously, that making sure that our children are well taken care of has on parents and really every member of a community. There are a number of things in our motion here that I think are really important to discuss. But I just want to start off by saying we traveled the state together, and there was a really good opportunity to get to know many of you. Some of you, I honestly wish I had gotten the opportunity to know a little bit better. But most importantly, it was an opportunity for us to hear from people from across the state on issues that matter to them. And everywhere we went, we heard about childcare. We heard from parents and providers about the importance of the Child Care Accounts program and what it does for them. We heard from employers about the importance of the Child Care Accounts program and investing in childcare, helping their workers get to work each day. So we heard that as a committee. There have been a couple of stories that I really like to highlight, though. We heard from Callie in Waukesha. I don't know if you remember, she talked about how she went to 8 centers and she couldn't get access to childcare at those. They were all filled up. She was waitlisted. And that ultimately she made the decision to leave the workforce to take care of her child. Now, as we're facing a workforce challenge, it's important that we make sure that parents, they'll still have the option to take care of their children at home if they so like, but they should have access to childcare to make sure that if they want to work, they have that opportunity too. If that's what's best for their family, that they have that opportunity. These are people who want to work. These are people who want to be in the workforce. They want to be able to make a living. They want to be able to move their families forward, and we should be able to give them that opportunity. We also heard a little bit from people about the cost of childcare. I think we all got an email from Sophie, or at least Joe got an email from Sophie, and he forwarded it to the rest of us. And she talked about how childcare for one toddler costs more than half of her monthly take-home paycheck. That's too expensive for something that so many working people find absolutely essential to be able to do their jobs and be able to keep our economy humming along. We also heard from Heather from New Glarus. She said, "We had to choose if my husband would still work or take care of the kids. People are making that decision every day, and it's a difficult one, but when we as a state are attempting, or at least we say we're attempting, to prioritize building our workforce, making sure that we invest in childcare is absolutely essential." Now, luckily, we have before us this Democratic motion, and it's got a lot of good things in it, but I'm going to talk about 2 here real quick. The first is increasing eligibility from 185% to 200% for the Wisconsin Shares program. Now, this is something that's been before this committee before, I know, but I'm hopeful that this year you'll take it. And it's something you should have done long ago, but it makes sure that more families can afford access to childcare. That's a good thing. We want that. We want more families to be able to have that option. We want more families to be able to do this so that they can work and build their lives, build their own future. The problem is that alone, it really isn't enough. And that's because it only impacts the demand side of the equation. So I don't claim to be an expert on economics. I remember a little bit of Econ 101. And I remember, supply-demand curves a little bit. Don't quiz me on it. But it only impacts the demand curve. It only impacts people's availability and accessing childcare, their ability to afford it, right? We also have, right now in this state, a supply problem. And that supply problem ultimately stems from the inability of childcare providers to pay people a decent wage. And so I believe prior to childcare counts, and I'm off the top of my head, it was $10, roughly $10 an hour to pay people to look after children in childcare facilities. And childcare counts helped raise that to $12 an hour. And that allowed employers, these childcare providers, to hire workers to be able to increase capacity and make sure that people were not only looking after their children at, in a careful, reasonable way, but also making sure that they could take in more people and that they could provide that service. And we heard from childcare providers from across the state over and over again that if they don't have that money, if they can't pay that additional wage, they will have to shut down. Now, in the papers, it noted that 70% of Wisconsin is a childcare desert. 70% of the state is a difficult place for people to afford or people to be able to access, drive to a location where they can drop off their kid so they can drive to work each morning. Now, we've also heard from childcare facilities, as I sort of intimated a moment ago, that they will have to shut down if they don't have this money. And it's not just some of the money. It's not just, well, if you give us 1/10 of the money or half the money, we'll be able to make it work, or a quarter of the money, we'll be able to make it work. $340 million, they need all of it. It's essential. It's essential so that they can stay open, so that 70% doesn't rise, so that working families still can go to work every day, and they can make that choice for them and their families and not have that choice forced upon them. The statewide impacts on working people are catastrophic. The implications of failing to do this are severe. They will harm our economy. Failing to fund $340 million in childcare counts will impact our state's economy for, I don't even know how long. It will be a long time. It will change people's ability to move into the middle class. It will change people's ability to move forward with their career. It will change their ability to buy a house someday, to buy a car, to save up for their kids' college. It will alter that by forcing them to choose between their kids and work. Now, we heard from a lot of regular people who were requesting this. We also, I think you guys got this, fight crime, invest in kids. We have police chiefs across the state who support a $340 million investment in childcare counts. We have businesses, employers, who are requesting that we do this so that they can continue to have workers. We've heard from so many people. We cannot afford closures in childcare. We cannot afford to exacerbate our existing workforce challenges. We cannot afford to not spend $340 million on childcare counts. Thank you.
Senator Royce.
Thanks. Childcare is essential infrastructure that we need for our economy and our society to function. To serve on this committee, I have had to engage in a ridiculous juggling act to try to ensure that my 3 kids are all cared for, that they're picked up on time, or, if I'm honest, a few minutes late very frequently from the places that they're cared for, and that somebody's paying for that, somebody's checking to make sure that they're signed up, that they have all the stuff that they need. It is really hard to do that. But I'm really lucky because I'm able to do that, because I'm not parenting alone, I'm parenting with a partner, because I have the resources to do it, and because my youngest kid, thank goodness, and my middle kid had a slot at childcare. The oldest one's in school. I couldn't do anything if I didn't have that childcare. Everything else in my life would come to a screeching halt. And that is true for every single person once they have a baby. Senator Felskowski very eloquently said on the floor the other day that the purpose of government is to do that which we're unable to do for ourselves. Things that, you can't build a road yourself or construct a bridge yourself, right? We have to work together and cooperate through our government to do that. And I think for a long time people thought of childcare as something that you have a kid, it's on you. You have to do it yourself. But what we have found is that is not sustainable, and hasn't been sustainable for a long, long time, but especially since COVID. We now have an economy where it's just not economically feasible for most people to have one parent stay home. And I know that a lot of people think, it's great, women, just stay home. What's the problem, women? Stay home. Well, a lot of women might want to have a career. They might want to work. They might want to have financial independence. A lot of women might not have a parenting partner, might not have the choice to stay home. And we need to make it possible for those families to be economically sustained. Even before COVID, half of Wisconsin was a childcare desert. And childcare desert doesn't just mean it's kind of hard to find a provider. The definition of that means there's 1 slot available in the community and 3 kids for that slot. So that's pretty serious. And you know what? 70% of rural Wisconsin is a childcare desert. And those numbers were consistent. In terms of affordability, only 6.5% of Wisconsin families can actually afford infant care. So over 90% of Wisconsinites can't actually afford to have a baby, much less 2 or 3. And for my kids, we live in an urban area. The cost to provide childcare is higher. The cost of real estate is higher. I could send 2 kids to UW-Madison for the cost of 1 infant in childcare. How about that? 2 kids to UW for the cost of 1 baby in childcare. So what we have is an absolutely broken marketplace where the hand of the free market has totally failed us. We have not a demand problem because there's a lot of demand everywhere in Wisconsin for childcare. We have a supply problem. And that is because my colleague outlined the wages are too low. The cost of providing care is too high. It's not something that can be automated or, have all the efficiency squeezed out of it. It takes human beings to care for children and young children. This is also really important for us as a public policy matter because we spend a lot of time in this building dealing with the downstream effects of what happens when people have problems, when they engage in bad behavior, when there are societal failures, right? Everything that's basically not a natural disaster. 90% of brain development happens in the first 5 years. And we spend almost nothing, no time, no legislative energy, and very little money on that critical amount of time. And I would almost be willing to trade you every other government program, every other public service just for the first 5 years, because we get a lot of bang for our buck on that. We have to ensure that every baby and every young child is in a safe, loving, supportive environment so that they can develop healthy and be ready for school and be ready to be members of our society that are productive. All kinds of studies show all kinds of high return on investment. We know that we can't rely on employers to address the early childhood crisis because even the employers that want to and are willing to pay a big chunk of the cost or even try to open a daycare themselves or pay all of the cost can't find slots. So even companies that are very successful at doing whatever they do, so successful that they can afford to offer these very generous benefits, find themselves unable to solve the problem. Market failure, right? There's nothing that we can do here. I have so many pieces of paper here because there's so much data, and I know it's like nothing that I say will convince you of the logic of this because you already know that everything I'm saying is correct. You know that there's a market failure. You know that funding childcare is a good investment. You know that we're going to see mass closures of daycares if you zero out this program, if you kill this program and do not fund childcare counts. We've already lost more than half of our childcare businesses in the last 15 years. That's stunning, from 2007 to now, so a little more than 15 years. So continuing to do nothing, which is what's going to happen if you let childcare counts close, is just going to accelerate that decline. And when I picked up my son late, again today, the daycare provider she said, okay, I'll be watching. You're starting at 6, right? I said, no, you got to stay up until probably 10 or 11. But these daycare providers are watching because they know it means the difference between their businesses continuing and not. They know it means the difference between them being able to have $13 an hour or $15 an hour or going back down to 10 or 11. And we know that 2/3 of childcare providers, based on the surveys that they filled out, hundreds and hundreds of responses with detailed comments, 2/3 of people said, hey, if my wages go down again, I'm going to have to leave this field. 4 out of 5 early childhood educators, the people who have degrees, college degrees, BAs and AAs, don't work in the field because they can't afford it. What a loss to our children. This is not a job that anyone can do. The only person on this dais who can do that job is sitting next to me. She did it. Not one of us could survive a day with 5 toddlers or 10 toddlers. I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody else could, but I'd love to see that. This is hard work, and you can't just have anybody from the street doing it, and yet you can make more as a high school student working at Culver's. So I don't know how to convince you that this is like the most important vote you're going to take, because we talk about so many important things. And obviously this is personal to me, and I hate when I get emotional because it feels unprofessional. But what's unprofessional is ignoring the needs of the most vulnerable and important members of our society, which is our kids. And doing so at a time when we have $7 billion that you are not spending. I mean, what is this money for? What are we saving it for if we're going to let our entire childcare infrastructure close? What are we going to do with that money that's more valuable than setting young Wisconsinites, our baby Badgers, up for success for the rest of their lives? Spend this money now. Spend double, spend triple. We could spend so much more. This is just stabilizing the industry. This is stopping the bleeding, stopping it from collapsing entirely. Let's add more and actually invest, and then we can defund in 18 years or 15 years, whatever. We can defund everything else that we're paying through the nose for. I don't know, let's give it a try. We've got the money. We're a forced birth state. You know, we've said no paid family leave, healthcare ends after 2 months, no childcare slots. Is this the legacy that you want? This is the cut you want to make just to end this program? If we had a $7 billion deficit, this would still be the last thing that you should cut. And if you do, I'm going to make it my mission to make sure that it is the last thing that any of you ever get to cut. And I will find someone to replace you who will invest in our kids.
Seeing no one else in the queue, we are on motion 106, moved by Senator Johnson, seconded by Senator Royce. Clerk can call the roll.
Representative Bourne.
No.
Katzma.
No.
Rodriguez. Kurtz.
No.
Dahlman. Goike. McGuire. Senator Markline.
No.
Strobel. Velskowski. Ballweg. Teston. Winberger. Johnson. Royce.
Motion fails 4-11. On to motion 116, moved by Bourne, seconded by Markline. Ms. Gabriel, can you go through the motion?
Okay. Very quickly, it does a number of items, including re-estimating costs to continue. It expands the Wisconsin Shares Child Care Subsidy Program to have a single initial eligibility and phase-out threshold at 200% of the federal poverty line, as well as an enhanced phase-out at $1 to $5 of income. It includes some funding for direct child care tribal contracts, as well as having some $10 million in the first year and $20 million in the second year to resume Young Star bonuses. And number 5, it provides funding to support development and expansion of the shared services network, as well as some social emotional learning initiatives for young children, and to support enhanced reward stipends. Item 6 has some funding for a child care resource and referral, whereas 7 has a child care revolving loan fund. Item 8 is child care administration. There's some funding for kinship care in item 9. 10 of various $6 million of funding in the first year and $1 million of funding in the second year for grant programs, including $5 million in 23-24 to increase the grant DCF provides to the Boys and Girls Club. Item 11 is the National Reading Program, which would create a GPR appropriation and provide funding in the committee supplemental. 12 is the state administration of TANF-related programs. Item 13 would increase the caretaker supplement benefit payment to $275 for the first child and $165 for each additional child effective July 1st. And there's a revenue reestimate in item 14.
Briefly on the child welfare items, this motion provides a 5% increase to foster care rates. It increases the kinship care rate from $300 to $375 per month. It extends state funding for subsidized guardianships to tribes. It makes 2 enhancements to child welfare data systems, USAQUIS and the Youth Justice Case Management Reporting System. It adopts re-estimates for the Division of Milwaukee Child Protective Services expenditures, and also for state out-of-home care and adoptions. It provides federal funding for training of qualified residential treatment program staff, provides funding to the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin for child welfare expenditures, and provides grant funds for the Triple P online parenting program.
Under juvenile justice in item 25, it provides $700